Welcome to Unknown Unknowns, podcast about things and people you didn't know in business that you probably should, or, can be nice to know. You don't need to know everything, I think, but you do need to have an idea of what exists and who exists. I'm Patrick, and I'm with
Nick. Hello.
A very muted, very low-key Nick today. I've had many more coffees.
I just want to listen to how you introed this. It's actually very good. Well done.
Excellent. I will keep this take. So today we're talking to Leonie Fitzgerald from Wealthology, and we're talking to her about mostly about her story and about property. And the reason I think that we've decided to do that is that we realize that in business there's unknown unknowns, but we can't forget we've all got a personal side. We've got a personal life that we need to maintain while we're trying to maintain this business thing, which can be scary and stressful at times.
Yeah, it's a scary thing looking at your business cash account and realizing you might not have much cash to keep you kind of going forward. Obviously, cash flow is very important, but what I really liked actually about kind of stepping outside of our spheres and talking about something that both of us had very little knowledge about, let's be honest,
and usually very little interest.
But it was a really good perspective to actually understand, like, there are going to be times when we're growing business, or we need to really get our heads down that we're not taking the cash in through our main business. Maybe we need an alternative source of income. And if you're kind of in the lucky situation where you're looking at investments, especially in property, I think there's going to be a few takeouts for you today.
Yeah, absolutely. Property is part of that great Australian dream. The houses that are as safe as houses, your investment is, apparently.
Put it in the pool room.
Castle quotes in this, I'm liking it.
Boom.
I think this is one of those things where I think if you're in that position, like you said, you're going to get way more out of this than if you're not. But if you're not in that position, I think it's also good to keep this in your mind and to really know that it's a doable thing, it's possible when you are in the position.
Yeah, and I think more achievable than maybe people realise in 2018 and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the best ways it's been put to me is like if you're paying a mortgage for the same as you're paying for your rent, what's the point in paying rent? And I'm sure there's all sorts of complexities that Leonie would bring out there in that. But I thought it was great. It's a great point to think about, we all pay rent. We've got to live somewhere while we're working and growing these businesses.
Let's open our minds, jump into the podcast.
Enjoy. Awesome. Leonie, welcome. Thank you for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. You know that I know you and I have had some really good chats in the past about, property not being a vehicle of investment that I'm particularly have had interest in.
Yeah.
And obviously when I put this together, wanting to interview people and talk to people, I couldn't go past talking to you about it because there's very few people I've found, especially from someone not interested in property, who can talk property in a way that I understand, but also in a way that I'm actually still interested.
Yeah.
It's really difficult coming from an outside point of view, and I'm sure you've heard this before, to get involved in something you're not that interested in, but you can't deny is a good investment. So look, I'm really glad to have you here, and I'm glad that you can share, with people your expertise. But for everyone, watching at the moment, how did we meet? We met in a networking event.
We did meet at a networking event probably 6 months or so ago.
Was it that long?
Yeah, maybe. We went for a coffee and we got on like a house on fire.
Yeah.
I think we had a 3-hour coffee.
Something like that, yeah. 1 coffee an hour and going through. We're all legal to drive though, so that was great.
That's right.
But I remember coming away from that meeting and going, we really got a lot out of that as far as property goes, and it's something that I might actually consider soon rather than anything else. But, I'm 28 now and I haven't got any property, but you started really early in property.
I did.
Which sort of makes sense as to why that's your career track.
I started, when I was 18, I bought my first investment property. I'd had a car accident when I was 11. Came into some money through a third-party insurance payout. So when I was 18, I went to the bank one day, put my card in the teller machine, and there was about $50,000 in there, and I had forgotten all about it.
Wow.
I don't come from a wealthy family, so we hadn't strategized or planned or even thought about what we would do with the money. So I went home and told Dad, and I said, Dad, what do we do? And Dad didn't really know either. I come from a not a wealthy family and not a poor family, kind of in between. But Dad's a tradie, Mum's a nurse, and he was working with a guy that did property. So we went out to this little country town out near Gatton, which is about an hour west of Brizzy, and we had lunch with Brendan, and he was telling us about a project that he was going to be doing very soon.
And Brendan was a friend of your father's?
Yeah, Brendan was a friend of Dad's.
Right.
I didn't really know Brendan. I think I'd met him a couple of times maybe. But him and a friend who I'd never met were going to buy an old house in Brisbane, put it on a truck and take it out to this little town next to Gatton called Forest Hill. And there's a big university at Gatton, so their idea was to rent it out to university students, which is exactly what we did.
Time-honoured strategy, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it works quite well.
Yeah.
Needed a little bit of renovation, and normally when you move houses, you've got to put a new roof on. They don't move very well. So there were some costs involved, but I didn't have to take out a mortgage, which was good. So I owned 40% of that property.
Really? 40%?
40%?
At 18?
At 18.
At 18? That's crazy.
Yeah, and...
I owned 40 cents at 18. And I think I've doubled that now, which is really
good.
great. Yeah, 28.
Moving up in the world
So, well, 28, in the next month or so. So, if you... That's an investment strategy also.
Yeah, good. It's good to have an investment strategy.
I've got gold. I'll crack $1.20.
I might be able to help you.
Yeah, probably not on the... if you can find me a mortgage, I'd be really happy.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so you own 40% of the property, and you were involved. You cut that in with the two other gentlemen who were involved.
Yep.
And then, what happened from there? Did you live in the property?
No. I was living at home with Mum and Dad, and when I was about 21, I went backpacking around the world for 9 months. So I did quite a lot of travelling. Came home and life didn't look the same. I wanted to go and live and work overseas. So I did that 12 months later. And while I was away, my property was just performing. Every couple of years I'd come home and Brendan would hand me, my wad of cash, which is my share of the rent. Obviously didn't have a mortgage, so there's no costs. So then I'd go off travelling and, spend my money wisely.
So for everyone else who's envious now, you live the dream life essentially in the best years of your life.
Yeah.
Travelling on, the money that you've invested, which obviously you got from a terrible accident, which isn't a positive thing, but the positive came from the negative, which is awesome.
Yeah, I did something good with my windfall. They say about 80% of people that win the lottery have lost all of their money within about 3 years because they don't know how to handle it. They don't have the right mindset. They don't have the skills.
Okay, so where did you get that mindset then?
Yeah, I get asked that question all the time.
Yeah.
I was brought up with a really good work ethic. My dad has always worked pretty much 7 days a week my whole entire life. And my mum's a really hard worker as well. So I come from a background where we worked hard to get where we were in life. And I think that probably was just ingrained in me to do the best I could with what I had. I started working when I was about 16 and I was still at high school and, I used to earn, $300 or $400 a week working at the local restaurant. So I've always come from that, I think, yeah.
So you've always really been a bit of a saver at the very least, and a worker, of course.
Yeah.
You've got to get the money somehow to save it.
We do.
And then I guess the windfall just sort of set you up a little bit more to accelerate.
Yeah, that was something really great to build on. And I didn't have huge plans. I literally gave Brendan my money. I didn't even sign a contract. That's how naive I was back then.
Did you do the whole spit on the hand and
it was the whole
shake him up? Yeah.
Well, my dad's from the country and so is Brendan. So it literally was a gentleman's handshake over a couple of beers at the pub with some lunch.
Pistols at dawn if you did wrong by you.
Exactly. Don't you hurt my daughter.
That's right, yeah.
And then we owned that property together for 12 years.
Okay.
And it had doubled in value, so my money works really well. And at the time I was living in London and I had bought an old house to do a renovation on. So we sold the property here in Australia and I used the money to renovate a property in London.
Okay.
So it was good timing.
So it must have been quite a bit out of that then, because from what I understand, $500,000 gets you a shoebox in London that you can possibly rent. Yeah.
Yeah, so we bought an old 2-bedroom house, renovated it into a 3-bedroom house, and our plan was to also build a brand new house on the side garden. Unfortunately, the council declined our application and the GFC pretty much hit the weekend we finished renovating.
Fantastic.
Great timing.
Yep.
So I lost all my profit in a period of probably 2 to 3 months. Hit really hard and really fast in London. So I came home about a year later, 33-year-old woman, tail well between my legs, and I was single at the time as well. Now, you've never been a woman.
Not so far.
So you probably don't know how it feels to be a 33-year-old single woman coming back to...
I know how they feel.
Bad. So it was a bit of a, I kind of hit, rock bottom there. Some of my decisions didn't quite work out how I was expecting. And it was hard. It was hard. I was living on credit cards and couldn't find a job because the GFC had hit. No one was really hiring. It was Christmas, bad time of the year to find a job. And I ended up living with my auntie in Melbourne. And it was about 3 months before I found a job. So I was literally living on credit cards, UK credit cards, and I had about $85,000 worth of debt on those from the renovation.
Fantastic.
So it was exciting times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And so how do you transition out of that? Like, where do you, because obviously, we spoke about mindset, it's got to start there before that, the sort of the churning can begin, the work to get out of that. And I mean, in those dark times, which everybody has in a business, in life as well, how do you churn out of that?
Yeah, it was tough. It went on for about 3 months, and then one day I saw a sign in a coffee shop, and there was a gentleman going out on his own as a life coach, and he wanted some people to practice on, I guess, and you just had to buy him a coffee, 3 free coaching sessions. So I gave him a ring, and we sat down and we did some coaching, and I got clearer on what it was I wanted to do in my career, because I wanted to change careers. And I literally wrote down 6 or 7 things, and one of them was property. The other one was helping people change their lives. A lot of stuff around self-development, personal development, showing people possibilities in their own lives. And I didn't know that what I do right now actually existed when I wrote that list down. And I found it probably 12 months ago, and I looked and I thought, wow, that's exactly what I do now. But I had to just make the decision that enough was enough, and I had to take different steps.
Right. So the impetus, I guess, so you said there that you wrote down that you wanted to help people, and as you grow yourself, the impetus those dark days to help people, like, because before you were very focused on, not that there's anything wrong with sort of building your own portfolio of property or expanding that. After the sort of dark days in doing that coaching, is that where that came from? Sort of like that pay it forward mentality came in, that you wanted to lift others as you go along as well, or?
Yeah, I think I've always been like that. I've always been in jobs where I am helping people. Kind of comes naturally to me, and I really enjoy it. But I think I was more driven to help people who had been in my financial situation.
Right.
And so I actually got a job in a property investing company, and I learnt the things I needed to learn to get myself into a better position. So at that time I had $85,000 worth of debt. So I needed to work out how I could pay that off and pay it off quickly. So I became quite driven around getting clear of that. So I became very, very focused on getting myself into a better position. And I just had to take the steps to do it and stick with it. That was the hardest part, knowing that it could be better, but there were certain things I had to do to make it better.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess, is that some of probably the best advice you could give then at that point for anyone? Is basically, once you have that plan, to stick with it?
Yeah, it's really important. A lot of people I meet don't have a plan at all. They've never sat down.
And this is property related specifically, of course.
Or just generally in life.
Mm.
Most people I meet have never sat down with their partner or even themselves and worked out, well, how do I want my life to look like when I retire? Where am I living? Who am I hanging around with? What am I doing? What does it look like? You just go to work every day, come home, have your dinner, throw your brain at the TV for 3 or 4 hours, get up tomorrow and do it all again. And there's a lot of people I meet that don't love their jobs. They do it for the money. They got to work to live. So that's one thing I do when I first sit down with clients is, well, how does life look like for you in 20 years, 30 years? What does it want to be for you? It's really important. Yeah.
So do you, obviously do that now. It's something that you would frequently do then.
Yeah.
It's something you also take potential clients through? I mean, we really haven't touched on how your business operates and what you do. So, like, maybe run us through that process a little bit.
Yeah, so I help my clients discover a wealth plan. So we have a look at where they are right now financially and how they want it to look like in their future. I reverse engineer the steps they're going to have to take to get to that point. So with my clients, it's investing in property. I help people build portfolios of investment properties, residential, in the big cities around Australia. So by doing that, they're setting themselves up for a better financial future. So creating security for their future.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great tagline. Creating security for your future. For your future.
For your future.
Excellent. So, I mean, when you do that, when you sit down with the plan with them, is that something that a lot of people sort of really, it finally clicks to them? Just like, oh, I really haven't actually gone through the hard yards of doing this, because I've done some quite in-depth planning before, and I think anyone who's done, a business plan, if you've done, I know, like I did when I started my business, download the government's business plan and gone through that step by step, that is excruciating.
Yes.
Like that sort of planning and reflection as to where do I want to go and how will I get there, it's a job in itself just to do that, and it definitely can't be done in a day.
Yeah. No, it is an ongoing process, and I sit down normally every 12 months, sometimes 6 months with my clients, and we do a review. So, let's have a look at your goals. How are you achieving? Has anything changed? Quite often when people have children, their plan can change dramatically.
Yeah.
So it's a working plan. It's definitely a work in progress, because things change as you move through life. And quite often things don't become clear until you are moving through the process.
Yep.
So, when I first sit down, it's more about, well, when would you like to retire? And retirement to us means when you can physically have enough money in your hand each week to live the lifestyle that you desire.
Right.
So what does that look like for you? Are you driving around in a nice car? Are you holidaying overseas once a year? Do you live in your dream home? Are you helping your kids maybe get their own property? Are you maybe helping your parents? My generation's the first generation that's not only going to help our kids financially, but we're also going to have to help our parents financially. So it's an interesting time for people of my generation.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And do you find that are people realistic about that, what they want? Or does everyone want a Ferrari and a mansion on the waterfront and things at the end, or?
No, it's very, very rare.
Okay.
None of my clients have the desire to drive around in a Ferrari.
Okay, so I'm unrealistic then. Good, it's good to know.
Most people I meet purely want to not have to downsize, so they don't want to change their current lifestyle.
Right.
So they don't want to have to eat the $2 bread instead of the $5 bread. They don't want to have to be restricted in what they do. So they want to continue having the lifestyle they already do. Some people want to have something a little bit better. I want to maybe travel twice a year, or maybe I want a BMW. But it's very rare to have, I want to drive a Ferrari, or I want to own an island. That's not generally what my clients are looking for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are people out there much more reasonable than me and their expectations. Look, I want to go back a little bit just for a second to when you sort of got into getting back to Australia, and it sort of got a little bit dark for you.
Yeah.
You told me that part of that was because you're a street fighter for a time. You were in bar fights and all sorts of things.
Only when provoked.
Only when provoked. Okay. So you had an injury there as well that you had to sort of get over to be able to work as well.
Yeah, I did. I fractured my wrist very early on when I first came home. My right wrist, and I'm right-handed.
Yep.
But it wasn't actually diagnosed. They thought I just had a sprain. So I wasn't behaving in the way you would if you had a fractured bone. So it took quite some time to heal, and it was quite restrictive. Not only did I have to rely on my family financially, which was really hard for an independent woman, I had to have my aunt help dress me in the mornings, which was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was hard.
Yeah. Okay. And your property that you had was sold by the time you come back, or was it being rented, or?
No, I still owned a property with an ex in London,
Okay.
and the plan was that he was going to rent out a couple of rooms to help pay the mortgage. So didn't quite go to plan.
Okay.
Took me a couple of years to get out of that property.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure you were glad you did once you got out.
I think it's always good to break those energetic ties.
Yeah.
And I wanted my money to put into something here in Australia which was more beneficial to me.
So would you recommend people if they were going to go into an investing situation, very often going into that sort of splitting scenario? I mean, it worked really well for you in the beginning, and then obviously not so much once you came back to Australia and your ex was in in London.
Yes.
Is it something you'd still recommend, or would you say steer clear of that for the most part?
Yeah, look, I think it's a great way to invest. If you can't do it on your own, then absolutely. If you can do it on your own, always best to do it on your own, because the bank always looks at everybody that's involved. So if you can do it on your own, always do it on your own.
Okay.
But I've got mum and dads that have invested with their kids, so they've all bought a property together.
Okay.
Mum and dad had the equity, and the kids had the income, so that worked really well. I've got brothers and sisters that have invested together. I've even got a couple of co-workers that have bought a property together to get on the ladder.
Yep.
So it's a good way to get on the ladder.
Right.
When you're combining two incomes, you can always borrow more from the bank, buy a better quality property if you like.
Yep.
But you do need to think of your exit strategy. So are we going to own the property for 5 years and then maybe sell? Are we going to bounce off of that and use the equity to buy another one? What is the strategy? So good to get that clear up front.
So sort of, exactly like almost anything, like a business as well is the same. What's the exit strategy, whether that's, now or in 20 years or whatever it is.
Investing in property is very much like owning a business, because there's income that comes in and there's costs that go out. There's tax deductions from the ATO. Yes, it's great. But it is good to have a plan. So when I sit down with my clients, we have a look at a strategy. What are we going to do? And some of my clients will buy 4 or 5 or 6 properties, and we have the plan that when they reach retirement, maybe they'll sell one and pay off their debt on their home if they still have debt. Some of my clients will just continue to hold their properties because they know that that's an asset that is growing in value, and it's also paying them an income. So different strategies for different people, depending on your age when you retire and depending on all the things you want to do. So,
and I've heard that, I guess, while we're talking about strategies, rent vesting is really big as far as millennial crowd goes.
Yeah.
Is that something that's still a good strategy, or is it being overdone at the moment, or is there anything that, is that something that should be as big as it is?
I'm a big fan of rent vesting. I've done it myself 3 times. And it's great for people that want to live in an area where they may not be able to afford to buy.
Right.
So as an example, I bought a property when I was about 35.
So this year?
Yeah, this year. Good one. Nice. And I was living in the valley, and I was living in a townhouse, and I was renting out 2 bedrooms, so I had really cheap rent, and I used to walk to work. But I wanted to buy a property, but I didn't want to be responsible for the $2,000 a month mortgage on my own, so I bought an investment property up at Mango Hill on the north side, and I rented that out to tenants who covered all of my holding costs.
Right.
So it didn't cost me a cent each week. It paid for itself, and I got to live where I wanted.
Do you want to thank them now for that? Thank you.
Thanks, guys. And then I did that again. 3 months later, I bought another one.
3 months later?
Yeah, 3 months later. Bought one on the south side of Brisbane, and same thing. Tenants covered all the costs, including my return from the ATO, obviously my tax deductions.
Okay.
And I just lived in the valley, walked to work, had the lifestyle that I wanted. I was a single woman then, so it was great. I was going out, spending a fair bit of time in the city. But I didn't want the responsibility of having, $4,000 worth of mortgages each month.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked a little bit, I think, now we've touched on some strategy. We've talked about mindset and, a few things like that. Let's talk a little bit now about the market and where it's at. Because I know there's quite a lot of speculation at the moment that Australia is in a bit of trouble in the housing market or coming towards that.
Yes.
As far as I understand it, and I could be wrong, especially in the southern states.
Yep.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, so people that understand property know that property always goes in cycles. So Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, they're performing at different times. So 3 or 4 years ago, we were all investing in Sydney if we knew what we were doing. So Sydney's now had their boom and it's coming off the boil, which is natural. That's always what property does after a boom. So when you understand how cycles work, you know now that you wouldn't be buying in Sydney. And we haven't sold in Sydney, for at least a couple of years, because we understand that once it hits the peak, it then comes off and then it bumps along. So 3 years ago, buying in Melbourne, because generally Melbourne always booms after Sydney. So when you know Sydney's booming, you know the next hotspot's going to be Melbourne. And then Brisbane naturally follows those two cities. So now's a great time to buy in Brisbane.
Yep.
And we're well overdue our boom for a number of reasons. We had a pretty bad flood 6 or 7 years ago here in Brisbane. That impacted our natural boom cycle. So I got a lot of clients that have been holding on, myself included, knowing that the Brisbane market is going to boom. So we've got some good growth here. And you want to get in the early stages and then ride the boom out.
Yeah.
And then you pull the equity out and you use that as a deposit for your next property in the next booming cycle.
And do you think that boom, as far as Brisbane is concerned at this point, is particularly in the suburbs more than closer to the city? I'm around West End, and there's a lot going up there, but not everything's full.
Yeah.
In that scenario.
Yeah, there's a lot of apartments and units being built in a city. That's not a strategy that we promote at Wealthology. We stick to house and land packages.
Yep.
Land grows in value and the house actually comes down in value. So when you're buying a block of land with a house on it, that land's growing in value. Whereas if you're buying an apartment, you might be one of 100 on a block of land, so you own 1% of that land.
Yeah.
So your growth's never going to be as good.
Okay.
Our target market, the people that we want to rent our properties, are families, and families tend to live in suburbia. When you have a family in your rental property, they tend to rent for longer, so they're longer term tenants. They're less likely to move around. Whereas if you've got a single or a couple, they're possibly saving a deposit for their own home, so they're not long-term tenants, they will move out.
Yep.
We also like to be in areas where there's really great infrastructure to attract those kind of ideal tenants.
So on booms in Brisbane and Australia in general, is, I guess, an everyday person with no pulse on the the property market at all, how would I then identify, what can I look out for that would give me an indicator of what the market's doing, where I'm at, whether that is Brisbane or Melbourne or whatever?
Yeah, it can be challenging because there's a lot of stuff in the media. I normally recommend my clients don't pay too much attention to what's out there in the media, because quite often the media is bad news. So you hear that property prices are crashing, people are losing money, there's lots of bad stuff in the media. So
you've said they're scum before.
Yeah, I tend to avoid watching the news, listen to the newspaper.
Sorry, media people.
But it's always good to work with somebody that obviously specialises in this stuff, because we've got lots of data, lots of analytics. We know what's happening in the market at what time. So, always great to work with somebody who's a professional, who's in the market, who is investing themselves, because I'm always watching what market to get into next for my clients and for myself. I'm still building my portfolio.
Yeah. I think from an outside point of view, I guess the hesitancy that I would have, and I think maybe a lot of other people watching might have too, is that people involved in property tend to be very hard and quick in the sell. And if you speak to them, you may never stop getting calls, ever.
Yeah.
Is there an easier way to do that? Are there other things that I can look for before I go to someone, so I can sort of gauge when the time is right to seriously talk with someone? Or should I grab a coffee with one person and just see what happens?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people out there that specialise in property, and you are right, there's some people that are very excited about helping people move forward. My recommendation is to start listening to podcasts, start getting yourself educated, read some books, maybe attend some meetup groups, start following people on social that are into property, who are helping people, grow their wealth, and connect with somebody that you feel right about.
Okay.
And I always say go with your gut feel. There's lots and lots of different people in my industry, and you will connect with certain people. There's a lot of big companies out there that are less focused on their customer service, if you like, and building relationships. So if you're interested in that, then I'd recommend a smaller company or somebody like myself. But start talking to people that are doing it.
Yep.
Be careful who you take your advice from. Make sure you are using somebody that is definitely investing for themselves is key. Unfortunately, there are people out there that don't invest but are talking about investing.
So that's an indicator to find someone serious. Have they got skin in the game?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Statistics show that the majority of real estate agents don't actually buy or have property for themselves, which is quite a scary thing. They're talking to people about buying property, yet they have none themselves. So if you're going to be working with somebody that does talk about investing, then make sure they're doing it for themselves, because then they know all the ins and outs. They've been on the journey. You know?
Okay. And is there room for buyer advocates and stuff there to be a part of that? Like, I know that I don't know a whole lot about the industry. I've had some initial contact with people before, but did they play into that somewhere in between, I guess, the person selling and someone actually?
Yes, yeah.
That's right.
Always good to have a coach or a mentor or, like you say, an advocate, somebody that knows what they're doing, that can hold your hand and guide you through the process. Here at Wealthology, we're really big on education.
Yeah.
So we like a client to take the step when they're ready. And some clients feel like they need more education than others. Some are just like, yep, bang, let's get it done. But I have a lot of clients who prefer the gentler approach, if you like. So they like to understand, well, why should we do it that way? Why should we buy a brand new property instead of an older property? Can you run me through the numbers? Because I don't get, how does it look after itself financially? What does all that mean?
Right.
So I do a lot around education, and it's quite a touchy-feely experience, if you like, so in a good way. So it's very much about making sure the client feels good about it, rather than just pushing somebody to do something that they may not yet be ready for.
Okay. Now, speaking of education, what are give us maybe 2 or 3 of, you spoke about books and podcasts before.
Yeah.
What should we, people potentially pick up and take a look at?
Yeah, look, one I always recommend is The Richest Man in Babylon by George Clason. Absolute classic. Talks about the sound money principles. The Babylonians were a very wealthy community, so very simple money principles. The first one that comes off the top of my head is save. Save 10% of your income every single week. Don't spend more than you earn. It's amazing how many people don't get that.
That basic tenet that I think all parents try to instill in you at some point, which I think is weird because most of us grow up to be parents and probably didn't follow that advice to begin with.
That's exactly right.
So Richest Man in Babylon. What else?
Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert
course.
Kiyosaki is another good one.
He blew people's mind when he first put that book out.
He did.
Yeah.
And that was probably the first book I read. I was about 21. And that's really what started to get me going down this journey, actually.
Okay.
So that's a good one. And he also writes a book for kids. So if you want to start helping your kids get their mindset.
And he's a property game as well, from what I understand.
There is a property game.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cash flow game.
Cash flow
quadrant, I think that's called. That's a really good game, educational game. Monopoly is a brilliant one.
That causes too many fights.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
I'm sure that there's divorces over Monopoly out there.
Depends how you play it, Patrick.
Yeah. Well, if you're the winner, then of course.
Yeah. But there's a bunch of podcasts online. We obviously have a blog. We share a lot of information online because we're always educating clients. We're also running programs. We've just finished a 5-week wealth webinar program where we talked about simple money principles, what you can do to get yourself into a better position.
So you've got some materials, obviously, that people can take a look at, which I assume, like you said, because you're condensing that information, will sort of be able to give them the crux of all those things that you would recommend to read and listen to, and as well to sort of get involved with, say, those webinars or reach out to you as well. And we'll put some
we've got a list of books that you should read to help you on your way.
Okay, awesome.
So if I didn't buy my own property when I was 18, would I invest today in property? Absolutely. I have seen what property has done over years. If you look at history of the last 50 years with property and growth, property has doubled every 10 years, and sometimes it's even tripled. So when looking at assets to buy, when you weigh up things like shares versus property as an example, because that's a question I always get asked, they've both grown on around the same level, but you can actually leverage your money better by buying property. So if you had $100,000 as an example, you could go and buy $100,000 of shares today. If you had $100,000 with property, you could buy a $500,000 property. You would put in a 20% deposit and you would buy a $500,000 property. Now, based on what's always happened in our history, property prices doubling every 10 years, that property in 10 years we know should be worth about $1 million. Now, if shares double as well, they're worth $200,000. So property is so amazing because you can leverage your money more. You can put in less, the bank will lend you 90%, you've only got to put in a small amount of money to grow your money a lot more quicker. So yeah, I would absolutely buy property today, and I would buy as many as I could afford. Because if you look back, right, as an example, back in 1966 in Brisbane, the median house price of a property in Brisbane was $9,700. Today it's over $500,000. What has your money done in the last 50 years in property? It's increased dramatically. So, yeah.
Before we move on, I guess what I want to sort of get at is, you know, what could I do personally? Because I think, as I said to you when we first met, I am not your ideal customer. Or perhaps I am, I don't know, but my mindset has always been, as I said at the start of this, that property is just not sexy enough for me to be involved. I think that the great Australian dream of owning property is just largely a farce. I think that I've always lent towards building an asset in the form of a business or you know, even shares. You know, like many people, I wanted to but did not get involved in Bitcoin 4 years ago. You know, I could be $1 million man by now, who knows? But you know, what you know, my opinion is that getting started in that, on top of the fact that I'm already against it, is really difficult to do, and maybe reading these books and things aren't something that I would want to do. You know, is there any value in me sort of even looking around then if I'm not interested at all, or, you know, is it still something that I should keep in the back of my head? And
firstly, I would ask you why you're feeling that way about property, so we do a bit of mindset conversation.
I can tell you. I can tell you for sure. For me, property is an anchor. If I own a property and it's here, I'm anchored to that spot.
Why?
And I don't know. I really don't know.
So a lot of my millennial clients, the younger generation, are buying investment properties. So they're using the rent vesting concept. So they're either staying at home with mum and dad so they can have a better lifestyle financially. Mum still does their washing, cooks their dinners, or they're moving out and sharing with mates, which, you know, I pretty much did my whole entire life until I bought my own home. I like living with people. I'm a social person. So maybe you're looking at it in a way where you have to buy your own home, and so you are anchored. What I would suggest is think about it in a different way. Perhaps buy investment properties and build a portfolio of assets that are growing for you and being covered. You don't have to pay anything towards them.
Right.
So that's not an anchor at all. That's actually quite free. And I've got a lot of fly in, fly out clients who buy investment properties and they don't own a home. So they're not attached. They can move anywhere in Australia if an opportunity comes up for them. But they've got an asset that's probably going to double in 10 to 12 years. What other asset out there can do that for you?
Right. Okay. Yeah, look, now that you've sort of said that, I think my opinion has always been that it's that anchor.
Yeah, your own home.
Because it's my own home, whereas I really have thought of shares in a business as an actual asset that I can be extracted from. And I can be removed from if I choose to be.
And I usually say to business owners, you know, if you've got a business, focus on that. You're brilliant at that. Let me take care of the property side of things, and then you've got two forms of income coming in for your future. So you build the business, and I'll build your portfolio for you.
Right.
So we do it together.
And diversification, like in all investment, is a good strategy.
Not all businesses succeed, unfortunately. In fact, the figures are something ridiculous, like only, I think, 10% of businesses survive after year 3. So a lot of people don't go well in business.
I think it's less than that even, I think it's 2% in the first year survive. 98% die.
So don't have all your eggs in the one basket. But I think it's probably the way that you're thinking about property, because we've all been brought up to buy, the great Australian dream, like you said, is to buy your home, pay your mortgage off over 30 years, get a job in a good company and work your way up. That's how we were brought up by our parents, because our parents were brought up that way by their parents. So it's a generational thing. And, our grandparents went through the Great Depression, so they taught our mum and dads, don't take any risk, eat everything on your plate. I'm a 42-year-old woman and I still force feed myself everything on my plate, because that's how I was trained, if you like.
Brainwashed by big vegetables.
Brainwashed.
Big vegetables out there.
Even though I'm not hungry.
Yeah.
So it's just probably the way that you've been brought up. It's your mindset. I would encourage you to look at it a different way. And one thing we do for clients similar to you who are in a situation where they can't afford to buy a property is we will work out the steps that they can take to get them to that position.
Right.
So we do a bit of a wealth health check, if you like. So we can give you some advice, give you some tips, and work with you on that to get you where you need to be.
Okay.
So when you're ready, we've already got a relationship, there's trust there, you have the education. So when you're ready to move forward, then there's nothing that's going to stop you, because we've been working on your mindset.
Excellent. Yeah. And mindset's such a huge thing, like you
Oh,
said,
it's
for
massive.
yourself. I mean,
Yeah.
having the pay it forward model that you have, being involved with Thank You Water,
Yeah.
those sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. I think we'll leave it there.
Beautiful.
Look, thank you for coming. Thanks for readjusting my perception, I think, a little bit. It's probably something I'm going to have to let process for a while, but
Yeah.
I mean, every time we talk, I get closer towards sort of seeing, that there may be some errors in my thinking, which is hard to admit, and I've done so now on camera, and I'll be keeping this, my girlfriend will be keeping this for future extortion. I've admitted wrong. Thank you.
Thank you.